My name is Mohammed Layiq Sediqi, the father of Holophase. We continue our story from where we left off in the previous episode. Last time, we stood together in front of a quiet but enormous question. We had walked through the great museum of human ideas about reality. We saw gods and spirits, elements and atoms, fields and energy, space-time and quantum fields. We treated the modern picture with full respect, a universe of energy living in space-time, expressed through matter and fields that obey elegant equations and match experiment with astonishing precision. And then we did something slightly impolite. We asked what energy really is, operationally. We asked what space-time really is, in terms of what we actually measure. We noticed that energy is always a number computed from other quantities, a kind of universal ledger, and that space-time is a geometry we infer from timings and distances, not a visible substance we can put in a jar. We noticed that in the lab, especially in optics and quantum physics, what we handle again and again are not little pellets of energy, but rhythms, phases, and interference patterns. At the end of the episode, we left you with a simple but dangerous possibility. Maybe energy and space-time are not the final layer of reality. Maybe they are maps. Maybe the territory underneath is something more primitive, something rhythmic and cyclic that we have already been touching without naming it as the ontic ground. In this episode, we begin to name it. This is our next episode in the series, and it is the first time where we stop critiquing the old picture and start carefully, gently revealing the new one. Here, for the first time, we ask together, what is Holophase? I want to start with a warning and an invitation. The warning is this. Holophase does not give you a familiar new substance to imagine. It is not like switching from everything is made of atoms to everything is made of strings, or from everything is made of matter to everything is made of energy. It is not a new kind of stuff you can picture as a fluid, or a gas, or a sheet, or grains of sand. It is more radical than that. The invitation is, instead of trying to imagine it as a thing, try to imagine it as a pattern of order that can show up in many things. Try to imagine it the way you imagine a rhythm in music. A rhythm is not the drum, not the air, not the ear. It is the way the drum hits are spaced in time. It is the structure of repetition and variation that can move from one instrument to another. Holophase takes this intuition and pushes it to the limit. It says, the ultimate ontic reality is not a substance, but a kind of cyclic order that can live on many possible substrates. We do not know what that substrate really is in the older sense of matter. What we can say, and what our equations express, is that at every point of the world, there is a certain position in a cycle, a phase, and that relationships between those phases and their changes are what give birth to everything else. This may feel slippery at first, so let us take it slowly, in steps. Think of a simple clock, not a digital one, a circular one with a single hand that goes round and round. Now imagine you remove the numbers. All that remains is the hand going around in a circle. The hand's angle tells you where in the cycle you are, but not in absolute units. It might be pointing straight up or halfway down on the right or just past the bottom. If I tell you only the hand is pointing straight up, you do not know absolutely what time it is. But if I tell you the hand moved from straight up to halfway down on the right in 10 seconds, you can start talking about a rate of change. If I tell you right now my hand is straight up and yours is halfway down on the left, you can talk about a difference. This angle, this position in the cycle, is what physicists call phase. In many systems, we can measure and manipulate phase. We can measure the phase of a light wave, the phase of a radio signal, the phase of an oscillating atom, the phase of an electrical signal in a circuit. We can compare phases at different points, and we can see interference patterns when those comparisons line up or cancel. Holophase starts from the bold move of saying, what if phase is not just a useful tool on top of some deeper stuff? What if it is the deeper order itself? What if the world, at its most primitive, is a smooth field of phase values, a kind of universal clock angle at every event from which time, space, motion, matter, energy, and even probability are all derived as ways of reading and combining those angles? If this is true, then the question, what is the universe made of, changes shape. Instead of answering energy and space-time, we answer, the universe is made of a single continuous pattern of cyclic order, which we call phi. Phi is not a thing alongside electrons, photons, rocks, and people. It is the underlying rhythmic order out of which electrons, photons, rocks, and people can be read. At this point, almost everyone has the same reaction, and maybe you feel it too. You might think, fine, but what is phi made of? What is it physically? Is it a fluid, a field, a kind of fabric? Where does it live? In older ontologies, that is how we anchor reality. Atoms are imagined as tiny hard balls. Fields are imagined as something spread out like rubber sheets or water. Energy is imagined as a kind of invisible fluid that can flow. Even spacetime is often imagined as a stretchy cloth. Holophase refuses to give you that comfort. It says, we do not know what phi is made of in that old sense, and we might never need to know. It might not be made of anything else. It might be that phi is the final layer, defined not by its material, but by its behavior. This is not as alien as it sounds. We already have examples in physics where we define something by how it behaves, not by what it is made of. Take temperature. If you ask a child, what is temperature made of? The question already feels strange. Temperature is not a kind of stuff. It is a way of describing how fast the microscopic constituents of a system are moving around, how much kinetic energy they have on average. You measure it with a thermometer. It has units and equations. It affects how matter behaves. But it is not made of atoms. It is a pattern in their motion. Or take pressure in a gas. Pressure is not a substance either. It is the average force per area from molecules bouncing on a surface. You can increase pressure without changing what the gas is made of. You just compress it or heat it. Phi is more like that, but deeper. It is not a substance sitting on top of another substance. It is a particular kind of order that can be present in any suitable underlying medium. Holophase as a theory says, whatever the hidden micrograin of reality is, if it has a smooth cyclic order at each point, and if that order behaves in specific ways, then all of known physics can arise as ways of reading its patterns. This also means that Holophase does not have to compete with future discoveries about the microstructure of reality. If some future theory tells us that the world is made of loops or spin networks or some discrete combinatorial objects, we can still ask the Holophase question, is there a well-defined phase order on those objects? Does that order satisfy the conditions of our theory? If yes, then Holophase still holds at the level of description we care about. If no, Holophase is falsified. So when people ask, but what is phi really? The honest answer is, phi is the name we give to the universal cyclic order field. It is like the angle of the clock hand at every point of reality. Its differences and derivatives are what our instruments truly read, whether in optics, quantum experiments, or wave phenomena. We do not know what the clock face itself is made of, and we do not need to answer that question to build a complete, testable, and predictive physics in terms of phi. Now you might wonder, is this not just a fancy way to restate wave physics? After all, we already know that many systems are wave-like. Coherent light is described by a complex amplitude with phase. Quantum mechanics uses wave functions. Materials support vibrations. Is Holophase simply waving its hands and saying everything is waves? If that were all it did, it would not be worth your time. The key difference is that Holophase insists on two things at once. First, it insists that there is a single phase, field phi, that closes the world. That is, every admissible observable can be expressed as a functional of phi and its finite derivatives on some window of reality. There is no extra ontic ingredient that cannot be coded as a pattern in phi. You do not get to add hidden variables, independent spacetime, mysterious collapses, or new substances that are not readable as phi structure. If you need those, Holophase is wrong. Second, it insists that everything it says must be grounded in our actual measurement practices. Noisy data on finite regions, reconstructed fields, error bounds, and cross-checking. Phi is not a mystical wave that we imagine. It is the object we reconstruct when we do things like digital holography, phase retrieval, or interferometry. We will talk about this in more detail in later episodes. For now, you can think of phi as the cleaned-up phase pattern that best explains what our detectors see. Let us use an everyday analogy for this reconstruction idea. Imagine you are listening to a piece of music through a wall. You cannot see the instruments. All you have is the sound reaching your ear. From that sound, you can often guess many things: the tempo, the rhythm, the rough melody, sometimes even which instruments are playing. If you are very skilled, you might be able to reconstruct the chords and write down the music. In this analogy, the raw sound at your ear is like the noisy data from our detectors. The sheet music you could reconstruct, the underlying rhythm and notes, is like phi. We do not know the exact material of the instruments or the detailed airflow in the room, but we can reconstruct a coherent description of the pattern that produced the sound. Holophase says physics can be formulated at the level of that reconstructed pattern. We do not have to answer what kind of wood is the violin made of before we can write down the symphony. We can build a complete and falsifiable description at the level of notes and rhythm. Does this mean Holophase is giving up on the idea of a material substrate altogether? No, it is simply shifting where we place the boundary between ontology and implementation. The ontic claim is that phi and its dynamics are the fundamental order we need to describe reality as we can measure it. The implementation claim about what phi lives on is left open and becomes a separate question to be investigated if and when we have access to that scale. This is similar to how computer science works. When you write a program in a high-level language, you do not need to know whether the underlying hardware uses silicon transistors, optical gates, or some future quantum device. The logic of your program lives at a higher level of description. It can be compiled down into many different physical substrates. The program is not made of electrons. It is implemented using electrons, but its structure is defined independently of any particular material. Phi is like that. It is a pattern that can, in principle, be implemented on many possible microscopic substrates. The holophase theory says, as long as the order behaves in certain ways, with specific continuity, cyclicity, and locality, then all of physics flows from it. If tomorrow we discover that the underlying hardware of the universe is different from what we think today, Holophase only asks, does this hardware support a field of cyclic order with the right properties? If yes, it is a valid realization of phi. If not, Holophase is falsified. This brings us to an important philosophical consequence. In traditional materialism, you often hear that matter is primary, consciousness and information are secondary. In some versions of idealism, you hear the opposite. Mind or experience is primary, matter is derivative. Holophase does not line up neatly with either side. It does not start with mind, but it also does not start with lump like matter or energy. It starts with structured rhythm, with phase, matter, fields, energy, information, and eventually mind all appear as different ways of interpreting and stabilizing patterns in phi. From this point of view, saying everything is made of matter or everything is made of mind both miss the target. The real primitive is this neutral cyclic order that can underwrite both. Of course, this is only a promise at this stage. We still have to show in later episodes and in the written equations exactly how mass, charge, spin, spacetime, thermodynamics, quantum probabilities, life, and cognition emerge from phi. For now, we are just trying to become comfortable with the idea that the ultimate ground is neither a familiar substance nor an abstract void, but a concrete order type, a field of phases. We also have to keep our scientific honesty fully awake. It is not enough to say, phi feels deep and beautiful. The question is, can this be tested? Can it be killed by data if it is wrong? The answer, at least from the holophase side, is yes. There are many possible ways to falsify it. If we find, for example, a reproducible physical effect that cannot be expressed as any functional of phi and its derivatives on any window, then holophase fails. If our best reconstructions of phi from real experiments disagree in systematic ways that cannot be attributed to noise or modeling error, then holophase fails. If certain quantum or thermodynamic inequalities that holophase predicts turn out to be violated, then holophase fails. We will talk more concretely about these tests later. For this episode, I simply want you to feel a kind of double movement. On the one hand, holophase is radically modest. It does not claim to know what the ultimate material is. It only claims to know what structure that material must support in order for physics, as we know it, to be possible. It says, I do not know what the instrument is made of, but I know the form of the music. On the other hand, holophase is radically ambitious. It claims that this one structure, this field of cyclic order, is enough to encode all of physics. It claims that energy, spacetime, fields, and matter are all encoders of phi. It claims that information, memory, and eventually experience can be treated as higher level organizations of the same underlying rhythm, and it exposes itself to being proven wrong. Let us stay with this for a while, because this is where most people feel both attraction and resistance. On one side, there is a sense of relief. Finally, a picture where we are not forced to imagine reality as little dead pellets or as a mysterious ghostly mind. On the other side, there is fear. If the ultimate thing is a pattern, does that make it somehow less real? Is it all just mathematics floating in a void? To address that, I want to give you three more analogies. First, think of a whirlpool in a river. If you point to the whirlpool and ask, what is that made of? The honest answer is water. There is no special whirlpool substance. But it would also be wrong to say that the whirlpool is not real. You can see it, measure it, fall into it. It can persist, move, merge, and break apart. It is real as a pattern. Phi is like the water, and many of the things we call objects are like the whirlpools. They are stable, repeating configurations in the underlying phase flow. The difference is that in the holophase view, we do not claim to know what the water is made of. We simply say there is a continuous medium of cyclic order and that certain patterns in that medium behave like particles, fields, waves, and everything else. Second, think of a radio. When you tune it, you are not changing the metal inside the radio. You are changing which pattern of electromagnetic waves it responds to. There are many stations broadcasting at once. In your room right now, countless signals are flowing through you. The radio selects one slice of that invisible sea and turns it into sound. In the holophase world, your measuring devices, your senses, your brain, and your scientific instruments are like radios. They are tuned to particular patterns in PHI. Some are tuned to very local differences. Some are tuned to time patterns, some to spatial patterns, some to correlations across distance. Energy is one kind of pattern you can extract from phi. Momentum is another. Charge, field strength, probability amplitude, temperature, information all become different stations you can tune in, different ways of reading the one underlying broadcast. Third, think of language. The same alphabet can generate an immense variety of words, sentences, and stories. The letter shapes on the page are not very rich by themselves. It is the patterns in which they are arranged that carry meaning. If you know the alphabet and the grammar, you can write any story you like. If you do not, the page is indistinguishable from noise. Phi plays a role similar to that alphabet. It is not a story by itself. It is the basic structured medium on which all possible physical stories can be written. The phase derivative code, which we will meet in later episodes, is like the grammar that turns simple local phase differences into the rich vocabulary of physics. Holophase as a whole is the claim that you can write the entire library of physical reality with this single alphabet on a single page. Now, it is natural to ask, where is phi located? Does it fill space, or does space come out of it? Does phi live on some kind of grid, or is it continuous? You may also wonder whether phi is something that oscillates in time, and if so, what is the time in which it oscillates? These are deep questions, and the careful answer is, in holophase, we do not treat space and time as the containers in which phi lives. Instead, we treat apparent space and time themselves as ways of organizing the phase structure. In later episodes, we will talk about triunity, where time, space, and motion appear as three views of how phi changes. For now, you can think of it like this. Phi does not live in a pre-existing space. What we call space is the relational structure of phi across different points in its domain. What we call time is the way phi changes along certain preferred directions in that domain. If that sounds abstract, here is a friendlier version. Imagine you are watching a movie file on a computer. The file on the disk is just a long string of bits. It does not live in time or space in the way the movie does. When the player software reads the file, it interprets parts of that bit string as colors, shapes, motions, and sounds. Suddenly, you see characters moving through rooms, landscapes stretching into distance, conversations unfolding over hours. The movie appears extended in time and space, but underneath, in the file, there is just ordered structure. The bit string does not live in a two-dimensional plane of the screen or in a one-dimensional timeline. Those dimensions are emergent when the structure is decoded a certain way. Phi is like that underlying file. Space, time, and motion are like the movie that appears when the right encoders read the phase structure. The difference, of course, is that in Holophase there is no external computer playing the file, and there is no separate viewer. The decoding is done by physical systems inside the same phi world, and those systems are themselves patterns in phi. This is how, much later, we will be able to talk about observers and consciousness without leaving the phase ontology. At this point, you might worry that this is all too good to be true. A single field that gives you everything? It sounds suspiciously like a theory of everything claim, and those have a bad history. This is where the falsifiability backbone matters. Holophase is not a vague slogan that says everything is one. It is a very specific hypothesis about what kinds of patterns exist, how they behave, and how every measurable quantity must be expressible in terms of them. It comes with concrete mathematical structures, concrete reconstruction algorithms, concrete error bounds, and concrete gates where the theory can fail. In the written material that accompanies this audio series, we provide full equations, derivations, and references. You will see there how phi is treated not as a vague metaphor, but as a precise object, a cyclic order field with specific regularity on which we build a hierarchy of encoders. You will see how known physics, from electromagnetism to quantum mechanics to thermodynamics to cosmology, is rewritten in this language. The audio you are listening to now walks you through the meaning and intuition of that structure, but it is always anchored to a formal backbone. For a listener who is not a specialist, you do not need to follow all the math to grasp the stakes. The stakes are simple to express. If Holophase is right, then our deepest story about reality changes from the world is made of energy in spacetime to the world is made of structured rhythm from which energy and spacetime are derived readings. If Holophase is wrong, then at some point along the way, experiments will refuse to be written in this language. There will be a leftover residue, a phenomenon, or a pattern that stubbornly refuses to be coded as phi, and at that point we will have to let the theory go. That is the scientific promise I am making to you as you listen. This is not a new philosophy that can never be pinned down. It is a proposal with teeth. It can be wrong, it can die, and that is precisely why it deserves to be taken seriously at all. Before we end this episode, let us address two more questions that often come up in people's minds when they first meet Holophase. The first question is Holophase just a rebranding of information? Many modern stories about reality say everything is information. That sounds powerful, but it often collapses into vagueness. What kind of information? In what medium? With what structure? Holophase agrees that information is central, but it does not start by saying everything is information. Instead, it says everything physical is a pattern in phi. Only after we have that substrate do we ask what kinds of patterns can be used as memory, as prediction, as representation. Information becomes a higher level concept, defined in terms of how one part of phi constrains or predicts another. In other words, phi is not information. Phi is the medium in which physical information can be encoded and transmitted. The second question is, where does randomness fit in? If everything is patterns in phi, is there room for genuine chance, or is it all secretly determined? Holophase is compatible with both deterministic and stochastic dynamics at the level of phi. What matters is not whether there is fundamental randomness, but how visible patterns behave on the scales we can test. In many practical situations, effective randomness arises because we are looking at coarse-grained patterns of phi that hide fine details. In others, there may be intrinsic noise terms that reflect genuinely indeterministic evolution. Either way, probabilities in Holophase are not mysterious extra ingredients. They are summaries of how often certain phase patterns appear across many windows and many realizations. We will talk about this more when we discuss quantum amplitudes and the famous rule that probabilities scale like the square of amplitudes. For now, it is enough to say, Holophase does not make the universe rigid and lifeless. A world of structured rhythms can be rich with spontaneity, unpredictability, and creativity. It simply insists that even randomness must be expressible in terms of how phi behaves and how often certain patterns show up. As we move forward in the series, we will start to draw sharper lines. We will talk about what it means for a region of reality to be a window where phi can be reconstructed. We will talk about when the signal is strong enough to be trusted. We will show how the first layer of physics appears as the simplest encoders, of local phase differences. Then we will climb step by step to time, to space, to motion, to forces, to fields, to thermodynamics, to quantum behavior, to life, to mind. All of that scaffolding will rest on the simple, strange idea you have met in this episode. That underneath energy and space-time, underneath matter and fields, there is a single continuous phase field, phi, whose patterns provide the real skeleton of the world. You do not need to believe it yet. You only need to understand what is being claimed. Once you do, you are in the right position to watch the rest of the theory unfold and to judge, as a scientifically awake listener, whether the world plays along. As you pause this episode and return to life, I invite you to play a small game. Look around and pick something nearby: a glass, a phone, a tree, a passing car. In the old picture, you might say, "This is matter carrying energy in spacetime." In the holophase picture, add another line: "This is a stable pattern in an underlying rhythm, a way that phi curls and holds together." You do not need to decide which sentence is true today. Hold them side by side in your mind, like two lenses over the same scene. Notice how each lens changes your sense of what it means for something to be real. One shows a universe of objects in a container. The other shows a universe of music organizing itself. In the next episode, we will take the first concrete step into that music. We will talk about how we gain access to phi. We will define windows, bubbles, where our instruments reconstruct the underlying rhythm. We will define visibility, which tells us when a window is clear enough to count as physics. And we will define encoders, the translation rules that turn raw phase patterns into experimental quantities. Until then, let the idea of a phase-made world settle, like a new melody you have begun to hum.